I'm David Butler. I'm the Executive Director of the KMA. Glad to welcome you all here today. This is a really exciting thing for Knoxville, and the KMA is really pleased to be able to help promote and publicize what's going over on campus. It's a real treat. I wanted to just real quickly, I'll introduce Jason Brown, who will introduce the panel today, and our visiting artist, Alice Aycock. A quick program note: at 6:30 tonight, Alice will be giving a talk all by herself, and you really get a better sense of her work as an artist. I would encourage you to come back for that. A lot of bars set up at 6 o'clock, so you can refresh yourselves before and after that. I think that'll be very enjoyable. Tomorrow is the dedication of a startling whirlwind of opportunity on campus, starting at 10:15, and I would encourage you to be there for that. It's a real red letter for Knoxville and for UT. Now, Jason, can anybody come to the charrette?
Yes.
Is that open to anybody? That's down at the East Tennessee Community Design Center at 500 A Street, starting at 1:30, starting after lunch tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to that to see. We were able to use the opportunity of this installation on campus to, we hope, jumpstart a bigger community-wide conversation about public art. Knoxville is woefully behind in this area. We have a lot of catching up to do. There's been a lot of progress in the last year or so. The city has set up a public art committee, which is chaired by Norm Magdal. And Norm, maybe you might want to say a few more words about the public art committee and what it's charged with. But that's a terrific sign of progress. There's no money yet, but at least there's a structure. We can start encouraging people to think about the possibilities of public art. We're lucky, too, that we have a really good model down the road in Nashville where some terrific things have happened, including a major piece by Alice Aycock. And we've got a really terrific DVD that we'll be showing you that really, in a can, puts the whole process. It's like an ABC of how to make really terrific things happen in your community. So, Norman, I wanted to introduce Bruce Burston too. Bruce, just stand up for a second and let us know who you are. Who's the Dean of Arts and Sciences at UT, and thank you for bringing him along with Dottie Abel, who's the chair of the art school over there. Norm, I think I'll turn it over to you. If you would just say a few words about the Public Art Committee, about this project that you've been working on, then we'll turn it over to you, Jason, and your panel and the DVD. So thanks again for being here.
All right, thank you. And welcome to you all who came, and I'm presuming you're very curious about what's going on. In July 2008, the City Council of Knoxville approved an ordinance that established the City of Knoxville Public Art Committee. After about a year of a steering committee with a larger group of people, trying to see if that was a feasible thing to do and how it would impact the future of the city. Obviously, we were all very positive about it, and we certainly had a number of precedents in Tennessee, including Memphis, Nashville, and Chattanooga, that had already established such groups. And so we had great precedent in the state for this. And we talked a lot about how that would really kind of be a topping on what I describe as a renaissance in art in Knoxville that had started almost back when it probably around 97, 98, when we had all kinds of studies and we were trying to figure out how to improve the culture and arts programs in Knoxville, which led to the establishment of the Culture and Arts Alliance, which Lisa is now the executive director. So this is kind of the crowning of that renaissance. We now can get the appearance of art and culture into the public spaces, which is probably what we are going to want to do in terms of the committee. The committee members include myself, Mickey Maloney, who is not here, she's director of special events of the city, who's our administrative representative, Barbara Bernstein, and David, of course, who's here, Eddie Manis, Alan Jones, and, Barbara Pilo, who represents the city council. And the committee's been meeting since July. We meet every fourth Thursday at 4 o'clock here at the museum. So if anybody is interested in talking to us, has any ideas, any proposals, that's the time that we would appreciate your coming. And of course, you can contact me or Mickey Melody at any time for an appointment. And we're very happy to talk to the community. We're still working on several major initiatives, the most important of which is funding, and what the strategies will be to help fund this committee, as it is funded very well, as you'll see in the DVD from Nashville Hamlet. Hopefully we can maybe do the same thing. And also, we're trying to become more and more apparent to the community, and we still have a coming out to do. This is kind of the first real coming out. But we are planning a whole forum where the community can come and see what this public art committees do, what it is that has been done, and in reference to that, we decided that maybe we need to do a kind of preliminary catalog of what is really already here that could be considered public art in permanent display, and mostly pieces owned by government subsidies, or at least donated to the government, state or city. And so A1 Lab Arts agreed to produce a preliminary catalog of works, and just printed yesterday. And it came out like this, as you see here. And we have right now 3 areas: the campus, the downtown area, and the convention center. Probably the convention center is probably not well known, but everything in the convention center is owned by the city and is public art, some of which is sculpture and some of which are paintings and drawings and so on. So that kind of tells you about our definition of what public art is about. And so we have a number of these, and maybe we distributed some of the smaller versions, a little harder to read, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. And if anybody has something we missed, or something on here that doesn't cohere with the idea, please let me know. This is a preliminary catalog, and we can update it and change it at will. And so please feel free to contact me or Mickey, City of Knoxville, if there are some problems with that. So I'm really happy to say that this Public Art Committee is really going to help Knoxville culturally. We're very excited about it, and we look forward to really making a difference for the city, and we thank the city. I mean, really, this is probably a big step for the city of Knoxville to take, and we truly appreciate that. So thank you for coming, and we'll probably talk a little more about public art in Knoxville.
Thank you all for attending today's event, and I just wanted to reiterate a few points that have already been made by Dr. Megan and David Butler. Today, I think it's important that we see the event today as just one of a series of events, and that's how we've imagined the entire Public Art Week. On Tuesday of this week, we had an exciting awards ceremony downtown in the Square Room that was sponsored by Dogwood Arts, and recognizing the sculptures that they have situated around the city right now. With the city the size of Knoxville, we really all have to work together, and that's what we've recognized in the past year. And so the kind of process and planning and structure that Norman's been outlining here, it is essential, and in many ways is something that many of us, including myself, have been anticipating. But it's also something you can't necessarily force. It's something we've been waiting for a number of years, for the city and the campus and all the various entities to sort of come together. And we've tried to make this week centered around the dedication of Alice's new sculpture on the campus, not exclusively as a campus event, which is in part why we chose the location here today at the Knoxville Museum of Art, and also for Alice's lecture tonight, as a way to say to the community that we're not closing our doors. It is part of our mission as an institution to work outside of our boundaries and work out in the community and do community outreach. And I think it's really exciting what's happening at this moment. And of course, the title of Alice's new sculpture, A Startling Whirlwind of Opportunity, was an apt description for the sort of catalyst that's coming, the sort of catalyst of how all of these events have come together with this sculpture and these various things happening simultaneously. So the mayor declared this week Public Art Week, as many of you know, and the committee came up with this title, and we just borrowed the title from the new sculpture because it's a good description for what's happening. There's a lot of great opportunities here. Not to overplay that word or idea, but certainly many of us here are excited, and I think there's many elements in place. The charrette that we're having tomorrow is in essence another of a first in a series of working events, which I think we're going to follow up with a community event in November that will be scheduled at a different time, probably a Saturday, so going to attract a different audience. And it's also a chance for our students to put into practice a lot of the things that we talk about in a theoretical sense. So we'll be actually going out in teams around the downtown, using the urban core as sort of our outdoor lab field testing grounds, if you will, and looking for potential new sites for public art and sculpture and murals and outdoor projects. We have quite a great deal of expertise here on the panel today, and so I just want to briefly introduce the panelists who've so generously agreed to participate today. First, Alice Aycock, sculptor, artist from New York City, whose work is really the cornerstone of this whole week, and we'll be talking tonight, as David mentioned, in a lecture at 6:30. Alice has an extensive list of projects that she's and creative activities internationally, and really we're fortunate that we've got two of them here in Tennessee, and it was just sort of coincidental that at the same time, 4 years ago, when the selection committee was picking Alice's design for the University of Tennessee campus, that she was also awarded the project in Nashville. And many of you have probably seen the project in Nashville, but that's the focus of the video that we'll be showing here in a minute. And I think the important thing is, as we look at the video, that we see that as sort of a template for how Knoxville can organize itself in a way that may be similar to what Nashville has established. Lisa Zinni, Director of Arts and Cultural Alliance, and probably active in just about every possible extension of arts and culture, even whether it has your organization's stamp on it or not. And so we appreciate all of your efforts throughout the city. Norman Magden, I think you probably introduced yourself actually, but Norman is a faculty member at the School of Art and has a long-standing commitment to serving the community through a number of projects that he's been involved in, the current chair of the Knoxville Public Art Committee. T.K. Davis, professor of architecture in the UT College of Architecture, and also former director of the Nashville Civic Design Studio. And so TK has a really special perspective on the process that was put together in Nashville, which led to the commission of Alice's sculpture in Nashville. And I think you.
Jason, I just wanted to mention that Norman has just been named Media Department's Man of the Century.
19th century.
I think just to give you a very, very brief outline of the topic that we're discussing today, in many ways, it's impossible to discuss public art without talking about policy, public policy, planning, urban issues, and the process. But at the same time, it's also important not to get completely wrapped up in those details and lose sight of the overall vision of how urban spaces and cities can be revitalized and reimagined through a public art process and a civic design process. And so we'll be talking about kind of those primary issues of public art and civic design today. And we'll start with a 12-minute video from Metro Arts Nashville, and then we'll move into some questions that we've got. And we should have time, and we welcome any of your questions from the audience. This really should be an intensive dialogue in the next 20 or 30 minutes. Thank you. Glad I didn't send you a copy of my book. I thought that maybe we could start just with each of you, if you care to comment on the film or the process in Nashville. I think in particular, Alice and TK probably have the most direct experience with that project and possibly the most to reflect upon. But also, if any of you on the panel would like to just sort of make some introductory observations or comments before we move into questions, with your thoughts about civic design and public art and urban planning, this would be a great time to do that. Would anyone like to take the stage first?
I'll
Okay.
start something. I think at some point, whenever it seems appropriate, we might ask Alice, as the point of view of the artist, having done a lot of these kinds of projects, what have been some of the really interesting challenges dealing with the political environment, the urban environment, and all of those kinds of things which play, and which of course the Public Art Committee has to be involved in. So maybe sometime you can say, how is that? Does that work? And obviously we have pieces, but there's always that, here's the artist with a great idea, and then there's this whole other entity with all kinds of different goals, and how does the artist and those goals come together? The Public Art Committee sees that it must interact with the overall development of the Knoxville urban environment. We do not deny that. And so we are planning on doing lots of different initiatives to identify sites in both the main realm of the city, and we really want to get more into the outlying neighborhoods. And a lot of what we do is deal with works that are gifted to the city and have to decide whether to accept that. Also, with funding in the future, we would get more involved in major commissions such as Alice's pieces. But we would also like to find a way to support local artists in the realm of public art, and that may be creating situations for local artists to create works all through the city, maybe in the neighborhoods and so on. And we do want to have the people in the neighborhoods identify locations that they would like to see art produced, which would come to us for consideration. And we've already had that from North Knoxville, that's come to us, wanting us to make sure that we consider them when the time arrives for that kind of consideration. So they're going through their own little remodeling, urban renewal development, and want to be involved. So we want to move towards, even before we can actually commission any works, identifying vis-a-vis the urban design environment, places that would be great prospects. And the charrette announced earlier that will be taking place tomorrow with the students in both architecture and in sculpture and design is about that. And we're hoping that they will come up with a presentation or two, and hopefully video will be involved, that would be showable to the, presented to the Public Art Committee in the long run for their consideration as well. So we certainly realize that we're kind of at the beginning, and we're going to learn a lot, but there are great precedents, and the DVD is a perfect precedent of how that works. And if you look at the so-called charter or bylaws of the Public Art Committee, a lot of what happened there is going to happen also in Knoxville. We're not inventing anything new per se, vis-a-vis the other cities, because we looked at all of their bylaws and ordinances, and they've had a lot more experience, and we learned a lot from that. And so we certainly are going to parallel a lot of that. So that would be my reaction to the DVD.
Well, I think what the DVD shows is the way they had a strategy from the outset, and TK can speak to that perhaps better than I can, but it seemed that they did partner with also with Vanderbilt in some way or another, using what was the talent that was already there in architecture and art to interact with the city and so that there was sort of expertise at the same coming into it that, as you could use the art, the School of Architecture and Art and Engineering, partnering with the city and then going out to the community and that kind of interaction. So the community is interacting with people who also have some expertise in the field. And when I came into it, I was really impressed by the fact that all that groundwork had been done. And so the people didn't feel as though something was being foisted on them. Because they had been brought into the process. But of course, and I always say this about art or anything else, the public needs to be guided. That has to happen. And so you have to bring the expertise to them and then have the interaction. And then I think that begins the process so they don't feel they're left out. Or it makes it much harder for them to say that they've been left out. So there was an awful lot of that done, and I was very impressed by that. And then from the very beginning, it just seemed to be handled in a way which is unusual. It was their first project. And I've done a lot of public pieces all over the place, and they have never, had a press conference before, which I thought was really good. So they brought in the local media. So again, the public got to see it on TV, their news stations, and so it wasn't just all of a sudden, where did this come from, kind of thing. And of course, then I was chosen, so of course I liked the process. But I would say that the semifinalists were all people of, the people I was competing with were really top-notch people. And again, having that, the public see the maquettes and all that was tremendously helpful. So everybody felt that they were sort of in on this a little bit, but it was guided. The semifinalists were all people whose work I really respected. And so somewhere along the way, there was a lot of expertise brought to the committee process. And it's what, from my point of view, it's kind of like, no, art isn't as complicated or difficult as, quantum physics or something. But it is something that there is a body of knowledge. And it's not just that everyone off the street walks in understanding You have to be educated to it. And so I would always ask that that public art be, that it bring the public up as opposed to us dumbing things down, and that interface is one in which people begin to get educated to what's really going on. And just like there are good buildings and there are bad buildings, and we want to make the best buildings that we possibly can, not just any old building. And the same would be true of the art that is within it or outside of it or whatever. Now that piece was a big undertaking, and it was not without pain on everybody's part. And that's the other thing. I mean, I'm kind of vetted with these things. I used to lie awake. After the first 20 years, I stopped lying awake at night, worrying, or waking up with that feeling in my stomach. But it is always, a process, and people have to come along, and it wasn't just a painless thing that we did there. It was a big undertaking, and people stepped up to the plate when certain things happened that weren't completely expected. They rose to the occasion and understood that, in order to get this thing done, people donated time, all sorts of things in order to pull it off. It wasn't just, as anything of consequences is more than just, oh, here it is, let's do it, and then it happens magic. I thought it was exceptional, though, in the way that up to through the DPA, and they do stuff in the summertime now with community outreach all around the piece, and so they're really doing like a real good job bringing people in and making it part of it, not just this thing that nobody gets. But they work hard at it. They work really hard at the media.
You mentioned a few circumstances that to me were important surrounding the evolution of the process that led to the result. One is, it's important to realize this was the first 1% for our project. So if it was not successful, it would be a catastrophe. It had to succeed.
By the way, I was aware of that.
Oh, yes, I'm sure.
So I did wake up in the morning with a huge stone and bottom of the stone.
So the stakes were very high. And one of the reasons that it would have been a catastrophe is that I think it's true to say that compared to many other parts of the country, East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee are very anti-tax and very anti-elitist. And those terms are sort of perceived by the population in general. And what that means is that when you're going to spend 1% of tax dollars on art, that gets a certain percentage of the population very uptight. And that anytime you're dealing with something that is as nuanced and subjective and complex as art, there are a lot of people who just don't understand it and are made uncomfortable by that. I think it is a kind of elitist, even joke, or something that's being put over on the public. And this is fomented in Nashville by an extremely strong right-wing talk radio mafia that is very influential. You may remember that when the state income tax was proposed 5 years ago, they circled the state capitol blowing their horns 2 hours a day with tractors and pickup trucks, the so-called tax honkies. I mean, they're able to mobilize an awful lot of sentiment against something of this nature. So the political sphere had to be supported and given the backbone to do the right thing. And that could only come through building consensus. Now the good news is that you have a true creative class in Nashville that's sort of a spin-off of the music industry. People think of Nashville as country music stars, but in fact there's 8 or 10 different genres of music that are all headquartered in Nashville. And it's not just the musicians, it's the graphic artists, it's just, the backup musicians, the technicians. There's all kinds of incredibly interesting people that are spin-offs, including advertising and whatnot, from that industry. That's what makes the city so attractive. Very diverse city. And in Nashville, it's sort of a situation where it's democracy gone mad because you have 40 city councilors. Here we have, what, 12% of the And what that means is, I mean, all they do is talk. They meet, they start their meetings at 4 in the afternoon, and they go till 1 in the morning sometimes. And nothing is determined, nothing is decided. That means you have a very strong mayor. And Bill Purcell is an exceptional politician. He's now head of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and he has a future in Tennessee and comes back, I think, if he chooses to. So, had to build consensus, and then, as Allison pointed out, there was a process that coincided with the plan of Nashville involving 55 meetings, and public art being a critical component of that helped generate that consensus where you could turn out 75 people at 7:30 in the morning for breakfast and a day-long meeting about where public art should happen over a 2-day period. That gets politicians' attention. When 800 people are signing up for those meetings and participating, that has a resonance with those council people to vote the right way and not be seen as Neanderthal. By the way, if you watch the Titans game over the weekend, just as we predicted, that beautifully illuminated sculpture was a centerpiece with any number of shots, from the room above. And that was always sort of a thought, what would it look like from above at nighttime too? It's a nocturnal experience. I'm very proud of something too, and that is that, if I'm not mistaken, and Alice can correct me, after it was installed by the steelworkers, Alice came to see the site one more time, and I believe noticed that there was sort of a 3 or 4 degree slightly out of alignment thing that was less than ideal. Well, this sculpture was not about just getting it done and moving on to the next project. Nashville and Sandra Duncan and her people wanted to get it perfect. So cranes were brought back in at some expense. That thing was repositioned to make sure it was perfect. And I want to tell you, it's an extremely popular sculpture in Nashville. The one regret I have on the DVDs, it doesn't convey the fact that pedestrian bridge, which is now the T-shirt of the city, the Shelby Street Bridge lit up by Fred Schwartz, that is inspired by the Walnut Street Bridge in Chattanooga. That's being used more and more. And so, in essence, you see this kind of swirling vortex of, some might say constructivist imagery or machine imagery, industrial imagery. You see it frontally at the end of Broadway, and you move to the bridge, and you see it from various oblique angles and directions, and then back at it from the other end. And also you see it as you rise up significantly on the bridge and then come back down. So the interaction of those various components in the assembly is highly dynamic over time, as is very typical route is experienced in the city by people coming to and from football games, maybe in the future to and from baseball games, because it's probably going to be a site for the stadium, and also from the whole East Bank neighborhood to downtown. And there's been the usual ankle-biting notes in the newspaper. They love publishing, that sort of stuff. But, the overwhelming sentiment is people are really falling in love with it. And I'm very proud to have been a tiny part of it. But most of it was done before I even showed up as director. So.
Well, what I would say is that the committee, sometimes I make a presentation and the committee will go, they will ask all these little nitpicking questions. And what the committee did is they saw the concept and they trusted that they would get it without sort of nitpicking everything. And then they when they got on board, they really got on board through the whole thing. Whereas another group might have gone, well, how are you going to do that? And just completely, it would have been sort of, it wouldn't have happened. So it was all around. Everybody believed in something, and we just were going to make it happen. And it is true that we put it up, and it wasn't quite where it was supposed to be. So we took it back down and put it back up the right way. That's and I'm really happy that we did. But I think what we've done here is a different kind of piece, and I think that a lot of the hard work and head scratching was done down in Fort Lauderdale. Aaron Small is here right now. He's the young man who did all the computer work and fabrication piece. Sort of went between the computer and the actual building. And so the fact that it was kind of painless and it actually went together the right way when it got here is a tribute to all the technical expertise that we had at the factory down in Fort Lauderdale. And what I would say about this piece, if I might, is that, and Aaron and I were saying earlier today, it couldn't have happened, I would say, 10 years ago, that it is really about the marrying of technology with fabrication, and that the complexity of the piece and the way everything comes together precisely the way it's supposed to would have been nightmarish 10 years ago. It was nightmarish enough, as it was, I'm sure. But what I do try to do is once I've managed one thing, then I say, well, let's up the ante and see what else we can do. And that level of all of those curvilinear elements just being right where they're supposed to be with that kind of tolerance and that level of complexity. So was what I was really interested in having happen. And we really did, I think, use the available knowledge that's out there, which again is the marrying of the different disciplines of engineering and architecture and art, which is what I'm interested in doing. I mean, that's really where I see the most exciting things happening.
During the review process, Alice was extremely persuasive in the use of digital technology to demonstrate transformation of the whole composition as you go around it, experience it in different ways and from different heights, and basically in the X, Y, and Z axes, different senses. I think that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah, you can't keep it, and I can't even, as many times as I've looked at it, maybe you can, Aaron, but I can't remember, it's not like it's one good gestalt, it's constantly changing. And I really wanted that, so every time you go back to it, you have to look at it again, and you can't just keep it in your memory. And so it, it was quality, it was a different site, and it was a different level of complexity than Nashville. But Nashville was a feat of engineering, I have to say, getting everything balanced. And in this case, it was the complexity of all those intersecting curves. And not being, with Nashville, I think you do kind of carry the memory of it with you. With this, you really have to keep going back and looking at it. And you still don't know where all the different parts are. And that's what I wanted to have happen.
But not, I would just add, in response to those two comments, that you did take into account for the piece here on campus sight lines and perspective, not unlike the Nashville project.
It's on a grid.
Scale.
Yeah. It's absolutely on a grid, and those sight lines are extraordinary. And within that, I mean, it's very classical in the sense that you have this circular plaza, the circles within the circles within the circles on the grid line. And so it was designed. No, there were a lot of things that came into it formally. I was looking at it today and thinking about it in terms of, and I think it will be a while maybe for the students, but life is crazy when you're a student. It zigs and it zags and it goes all different ways. And it's not just, it's not just that grid at all. And you go in one way and you come out completely the other. And so I think that there's a kind of wildness to this piece that I think actually does reflect what it's like to be a young person. Life is just, it's not that straight path. I just know it. Wasn't for me, and it isn't for any of the kids that I teach. So I think there's a kind of zaniness about this, and that is a little, from this content point of view, is appropriate. I hope they get it eventually.
Lisa, I'd like to hear comments from you, but also as one of the original committee members that was on the selection committee for do you have, I mean, do you want to reflect on looking back 4 years to that process that we went through, which was not unlike what Nashville did in terms of the number of applicants and the number of images we looked at and how we got to where we are now?
When we started out, I had never been involved at all with any kind of public art creation. Of course, I had studied ad nauseum the visual. Okay, this city has all these pieces of public art, and that city has all these pieces of public art, and this one costs this much, and this one costs that much, and this is what they had to do politically to get the money to, make these pieces, and all that I knew, but I had no idea about all the artists and who would respond, and all the very different takes they had on the site. I remember that there was one that had a very elegant kind of take on the site, and it was, it was lovely, but it just seemed to us, and forgive me, Mr. Russell's not here, but it was a little too elegant and predictable for the concept of opportunity. There is a lot of what, I mean, you said it perfectly, I feel. You go into that university on thinking you're on one path, and you almost always come out on a very different angle, a very different, because of the opportunities that you are exposed to, within that experience of within the university. So it was a lovely piece. We also had among the artists that we brought in and talked to, who responded to the site, a kinesthetic piece that had all kinds of moving parts. And I remember there was one artist who came up with an organic piece. It looked almost like a pot with many exquisite, pieces to it. And I just have to say that what captured, it's so funny to hear you say this because I had not articulated that to myself. That wild experience of life when you're young, and pow, out you come, out the top, bang, but that's it, and it captured our imaginations. But I will say this, it was frightening to me. It was exciting, it was frightening, and I'm going to add a little. Because Alice was very clear that, at least I heard this, you can't tie me down today to an exact piece of that's going to be delivered when we're finished here. You can't tie me down. You can't tie me down to time. You can't tie me down to the exact dollar. You can't tie me down to exactly what you're going to get, because I don't know. I am on a journey. I will be on a journey with this piece, and it may change. And it was very funny because, I felt like, even though it wasn't my money we were paying, I felt like olive oil from Popeye. Ding, ding, ding. I was a little nervous about it. But there again, this process mirrored what she was trying to say. Is that off we go, and let's see where we'll come out. And really, the timing of this was really a beautiful reflection of the timing of what this community was going through. I think that in 2002, when Mayor Purcell got through that allocation, that 1% allocation, because money makes it happen. And it was 5 years from the allocation of the money in 2002 till the finished piece in 2007. And I think here in our community, we get really frustrated. Why aren't things happening faster? It's sustained effort over time, and that building of community support, and that feeling of ownership that builds from the people who are experiencing it, the people who are involved with it. So I think that sustained effort over time we owe a debt of gratitude, not just to the Hill family and not just to Alice for hanging in there, but to the university too, for keeping that going. And then the art committee that will continue to roll this opportunity forward.
Thank you. I'm sure there's questions that you're just jumping at your to ask. I know Jacob in particular. He actually emailed me questions before today's event. So I just want to share an observation and a small story with you from this morning when I was out on the site and Jacob and I were out there doing some finishing work. And I had a conversation with Dennis, who's one of the grounds, UT facilities grounds crew, and he's assigned to the pedestrian walkway. So, like it or not, he's the caretaker, and he's really stepped up to this task and this responsibility. And it's been very interesting just in the course of 4 weeks from the time in July when the pieces started arriving and we started installing it to now, to hear him talk about the object, the public artwork, the design, in a way that is becoming increasingly sophisticated as he talks to his friends about it and his family. And he did notice that it was featured on the televised version of our first home football game during a cut to commercial break. And he thought that was great. And he said, I haven't been here at night, but I really want to come in because my brother-in-law has a night shift, and he says it's fantastic at night. And we were talking more and more about this, and I think one of the tough things, especially when we've got public art as a sculptural object that isn't necessarily a recognizable image or a recognizable object. We're not talking about, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to some of the designs we competed with in Nashville, we're not talking about a giant guitar to represent the city of Nashville, or a giant power tee, as some of the students have suggested would be ideal for our campus. But it's a little harder to understand and sort of get your mind around and start to experience this shaping of space. And I think that comes back to a few of the comments that were made earlier. When we're talking about sight lines, when we talk about movement of people through urban spaces, I think some of the more challenging designs and designers and artists and architects working understand that and get it. But it's a lot harder sell. We can't easily package that. And it does take time for the public to sort of experience it. And then the landmarks can't easily be sort of put out. And it's very difficult. The landmark takes time, right? I mean, we've come to embrace, and TK and I were talking about this earlier, things like the Sun Sphere or the JFG sign or the bridge that goes from the museum here across World's Fair Park. Those things come through years of people using them and becoming in love with the spaces and appreciating them. And so I think in time, as we're seeing in Nashville, your sculpture is now part of that landscape of the downtown, and is becoming, it's embraced by the general public. And I think the same thing is happening here and will happen here. But do any of you have any more comments about that very kind of difficult to define, that kind of ethereal practice of shaping space through the practice of civic design?
Oh, yeah. I think that sculpture, has always been a key component of civic art or civic design, or has now become planning, beginning with statuary and obelisk all the way through history. And this is simply a little miraculous at the moment. I must say, I love where it's located. And one of the things I love about it is it's not often off to the side somewhere. It's right, it confronts you, And every day as I come to work, there are what seem like thousands of freshly scrubbed freshmen and sophomores, rubbing cul-de-sacs and subdivisions that are under general anesthesia of some sort, going to class right by this, and now they're being confronted by it. But every time they go by it, they'll notice something different. They'll see something different, I suspect. I know I do. I'm just looking at this one photo, and for the first time I've seen, speaking of zany imagery, you know how people, they're juggling acts where they take the poles and plates are spinning and it gets totally crazy, There's a little bit of that in this too.
That's a source.
Yeah, and the point is, that's not the only source. Alice probably had 15 different sources. And the more possible interpretations that are indeterminate and subjective and from moment to moment, the better the sculpture. And I think that the students will discover that over 4 years, if not 4 weeks, you know? And by the way, that's a great tradition in public art. That immediately there's a kind of shock, but people come to love it. It happens, you know, from the Eiffel Tower on down. It's very quickly embraced by the community. It may take a few days, a few weeks, from the shock value going away or whatever. But public art should be noticed, I think, and it should not be obsequious. If it is, it's not working.
I agree. I spend a lot of time, I'm not trying to defend myself, but downloading images, and I just, you know, keep rifling through images, hundreds and hundreds of images to sort of do research. But I will say that I also try to spend a lot of time. I think particularly now, we are a culture where you can go from Knoxville to New York City to, you know, Denver, Colorado, and get off the airplane, and you don't feel like you've gone anywhere. It's the same place because, you know, it's frankly, and so I spend a lot of time trying to come up with images that you haven't seen, that actually do make you go, what is that? Instead of trying to make it just blend into the general fabric, because I feel like so much of what we now see, we've seen a million times before, and wherever we go, it's the same thing. And I don't think it used to be that way. But I on purpose, I want somebody to, now I think a lot of those kids do walk by, because, to be honest with you, they don't look up yet, you know, but you know, I want them to go, what is that? You know, and even if it is not necessarily like, oh, you know, what is that? And it's better than just, you know, oh, it's just the same sign that I saw last week, or I saw, you know, that I really try very hard to do that. And so it sounds like I succeeded.
And I have a son in mechanical engineering who goes by every day, and I testify on his behalf.
Well, I think people who work with who make things, and who are the man who installed the sculpture was a local fabricator, and rigor got him right away. So I think it's just harder for people who aren't in those fields to understand it right off the bat.
I wonder if I could just make one comment. I'm really captured by two ideas, and I think I've come from all of you collectively. And one has to do with the role of time as process and germination, but also time to embrace the contribution of the work and to familiarize yourself with it and loving it. And the other is the importance of place and the role of sightlines and just the practicality of the planning, where the sort of planning as, I guess, spatial tissue rather than structure intersects with the art that's on the site. And you know, my own interest is in urban planning, and what I find so distinctive about your work, Alice, is you have such an extraordinary sense of scale, I think. And I think scale is critical to learning to love something, because if it's insignificant, you don't see it or appreciate it. If it's overwhelming, it's offensive to your interaction with it. And I know in Nashville, and it's a really big site that you're dealing with, and that's a really big structure. But so many times the views of it you see seem so perfect in terms of site. And I was captured by the idea that there was the effort to make it perfect. You know, the view saw was not quite what you had in mind, but the city was willing to go the extra mile.
Well, the fabricator was willing. His arm was twisted. He was willing.
Well, it's some
So
right?
there's some of that going on. You know, I have great fabricators. But when, you know, I would say that there was a connection detail that was just put on at slightly the wrong angle. And, you know, it's not just, I mean, there's a lot in this process, and some of it is as I like to say, I have, I can get pretty pissed off from time to time. And you have to in order to make people do what they're supposed to do. So it was a case of, going back and saying it didn't go up exactly the way it was supposed to go back up. You have to bring some cranes down here and take this section down and re-weld it off the angle that it's supposed to be, so it goes up exactly, the way it's supposed to. So there is, it's a process, and it's not just, as I said, starting out with a drawing in your studio. It's a construction management, interfacing with people, and knowing when to draw the line in the sand. And so that's what happened there.
I think the comment was less about your process and more about our process, in the sense that I think what your work offers a sensitivity to scale that will afford the acceptance of the piece over a longer period of time. I mean, I have the same experience. I mean, many of us who come to campus by car have had the experience of driving down the Vanderbilt Avenue and seeing it, or walking across campus and starting way down by the stadium and starting to see it, where at one point you see a whole lot of it and then it sort of disappears and then you actually see more of it. And
It changes scale a lot, I think, depending on where
It's
you
just
are.
extraordinary, and when you're right next to it, it's almost cute, I think. It's not huge. I mean,
It does seem
has
smaller
a
when you're
very
next to it than when you're far
It's
away.
a very
Yeah.
intimate scale when you're standing right next to it.
Those of you who were involved in the original commission, was that site selected, was that site handed to you, Alice, or?
I think it was pre-selected.
Okay.
Which actually, on a campus of this size, is a pretty good idea to give people certain parameters. Otherwise, you're really just completely.
Tangent here. Listening to all this, and I'm thinking about a broader issue that my committee is going to face when we have to make some selections or choose panels for selections. And I'm making it a broad observation, so I am general. But you have even with Alice's pieces on campus, the problem is who the viewers are and what the piece is. And a lot of that magnifies when choices are being made, depending on where you are, of course, geographically. But I see there's these two sides that I can figure that we're going to argue in the committee when we have that opportunity. It's what I call...
We have something to argue about.
Yeah. So on the one hand, we have what I call the man on horseback syndrome, which is what the public really thinks public art is. And then we have the modern public art, which is interesting, largely, though not always, abstract, which is a whole other issue. Why is it abstract? But that's a whole other issue. So my question is, for the family that supported this, how they felt about essentially an abstract form, and they didn't say, well, there's no man on horseback. How can you fund this? So I would be interested in how they reacted to the image when they saw that was going to be the piece, or did it matter? Of course it didn't matter. So I don't know if somebody wants.
Well, I think the original conversation that I had with Jack Williams was that what I wanted to see was contemporary art that spoke to me opportunity. And that was the very first conversation we ever had about it. I didn't really want something to sort of hit you in the face that said University of Tennessee football, even though I love University of Tennessee football. And I wanted something that had a lot more. You got to think about it a little more. You got to work for it a little more. Then it's hit you in the face. And we had, I think all the final pieces were, all the final submittals were all very contemporary. conversation, I mean, it was like, that's it. You're right, I mean, that really felt like the one we wanted. Even though we weren't sure that was what we were gonna end up with.
But she wanted-
We knew it was gonna be reasonable close. So,
I want to ask something, Jason. I could be way off base, but, and this was, I think, the beauty of this project is that the pedestrian walkway area was being designed almost at the same time this was being imagined. And Jason, wasn't it true that there was a section, it was almost like in a corner, that they originally thought, yeah, would be the site. But Alice came in and with cojones the size of Texas said, that site doesn't interest me at all, but this site does. Isn't that right?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think
I mean, I just think that was a no, we were like.
but going back to both Chick's point and David's point about placement, but also idea, there was an open-mindedness and an open platform, in essence, at the beginning of this project that made it possible for